Mayor Bondi, we can't hear you.
Jonathan, if you could just go ahead.
Okay.
Fix Mayor Bondi's difficulties.
Okay. I can hear Jennifer for just to let everyone know, but not Mayor Bondi. Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. We're here for the meeting to consider for the Cahill drain. The purpose of the meeting to consider is to have the engineer present the report to council, to review the technical components of the report, to hear any questions or appeals on the technical merits of the report, and then to potentially have a first and second reading of the bylaw to adopt the report. So the Cahill drain is one of 7 drains that were initiated at the time the Parkway project was underway. This was at the request of the MTO. So we've worked through a couple of these drains and we're on to Cahill at this time. Tim Oliver and Tony Peralta have prepared the report, and in a minute I'll let them get into the presentation and going through some of the details of the report. This report's a little unique in that, or all of these reports that were initiated by the Parkway are a little unique in that the MTO paid for the engineering work that's being done on these reports to get them to this point, and from there Tony and Tim based their assessments based on that. Again, if there's any questions regarding the assessment portion of the report that isn't meant for this meeting, that's meant to be heard at the Court of Revisions, which would be the next scheduled meeting. Upon the conclusion of this, we would schedule that meeting. So any questions regarding assessments should be held off to that meeting. From there, I'll let Tim, I think Tim will likely start with his review of the report, and then Tony, and we'll have be available for any questions after that. Thank you.
Hey, Tim, let me just interrupt. My microphone was not working, so this is just following the rules. When I asked for disclosures of interest, no one could hear me, so I'm just going to re-ask that question before we proceed. Any disclosures of conflict of interest?
No, none.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Jonathan. Your Worship, members of council, this drainage report that was submitted back in 2020 for the Cahill drain, I will go through an overview of some of the work. There's quite a bit of detail in there. So just for the sake of council's understanding, I'll just highlight some of the main items and then hopefully leave time for any questions from any landowners that may be participating on this call. So just to give you a little bit of background, this Cahill drain, it has some history. I mean, it was originally established back in the late 1800s. And as a municipal drain at the time, I mean, it does have bylaws over the history of how it was improved and maintained. In the case of the Cahill drain, there's not as much history as you would expect for such a large drain. And if I can share my screen here, I'll just bring up a okay, assuming everyone can see that drawing there with all the pretty colors on it. So basically, try to use my hand here to kind of move things around, but the Cahill drain, as I said, it has a number of bylaws that were established in the past with the drain. And there had not been any work or improvement on the drain until the late 1980s and early 90s. And those works comprised in the early 90s, the drain at its outlet into Turkey Creek, which is on the far left side of the drawing there, is where the Cahill drain outlets. There was improvements made by an engineer under a report in the early 90s to improve the Cahill drain from that point upstream across Malden Road to a point where there's an existing street called Dunkirk Avenue. And so right here. And from this point here, this drain was made enlarged and was improved with the development of lands on both north and south side of the drain. It was basically channelized and improved such that when you have your significant 1 in 100-year storm events, the drain was capable of conveying those flows within the channel. The other engineer's improvement made was just prior to that, a few years prior in the late 80s, there was an improvement made on the drain starting about midway where the Lennon drain actually outlets into the Cahill. And it continued upstream to where what is now the Parkway, what time was the former Highway 3. There was improvements made along the channel, continuing along the highway portion. And since then, there really hasn't been any other improvements made on there, any engineers' reports. Until 2013, 2014, when the Herb Gray Parkway construction was underway. And this whole yellow shaded area you see that crosses through the area that's being served by the Cahill drain. The Cahill drain crossed that highway. And with the construction of the parkway, there was modifications made to the Cahill drain. Those modifications involved the replacement of a culvert that had originally crossed under the highway. There was a new structure installed there. And there was also the enlarging of the drain channel along the north side of the highway, continuing upstream from that culvert crossing of the highway all the way to Cousineau Road is where the Cahill drain then turns and heads into the city of Windsor. So the drainage works under the parkway had stopped at that point. And in addition to that, with the rest of the highway work, there was further improvements made to the Wolf drain, which was a drain that outletted into the Cahill and continued further to the east along the new Herb Gray Parkway. As for the Cahill drain upper portion within the city of Windsor along Cousineau Road, that section of drain was recently undertaken through an improvement under a engineer's report in 2019, just a few years prior to this one. And so the city of Windsor has undertaken that under a separate report. And so mainly the purpose of this report you have here before you this afternoon is really to look at the improvements downstream of the parkway. And so through the appointment, we were to examine the drain, to look at any impacts that the parkway improvement project may have had on the Cahill drain, as well as to take into consideration any updates that were needed to the Cahill drain in terms of past bylaws, and look at where there was necessary improvements to be made just due to not having the maintenance and upkeep on certain sections of the drain that are downstream of the parkway. And what we found from our survey and examination of the drain is that this midsection of drain, particularly picking up from just downstream of the Lennon drain, and continuing upstream of where the Lennon Drain comes in, all the way up to just before you reach Huron Church Line. This portion of drain we found was the area where the drain needed attention. The capacity within the existing drainage as it was surveyed was not conveying what would be the typical minimum requirement for a municipal drain that's servicing a residential area, which predominantly most of the drainage areas within the Cahill drain area is residential. The overall area involved here and that contributes to the Cahill drain, there's approximately 4,400 acres, of which just over half of that is located within the city of Windsor, which is this large gray shaded area. There's approximately 35% of the area contributing within the town of LaSalle, and the remaining 13% is found within the town of Tecumseh at the very upper end of the Wolf Drain, which, as I mentioned earlier, does drain and feed into the Cahill Drain further along the parkway. And so from our examination of the drain, we found a few things that needed attention. The section of drain here in the middle, it's in an area where there really isn't any development. The lands are part of a LaSalle woodlot that are not developable lands, where the presence of bylaws for the Cahill drain were not found, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of record on this section of drain. So through our examination, we found this is the area where there was the need to look at some improvements to consider. And so what we did is we went through and outlined what some of those improvements are within the report. So to start with, if I move on here to the next page. So this is just an enlargement of part of the Cahill drain. Here is the Lennon drain coming in. So this is about the midway point of the Cahill drain where the Lennon drain comes in. And predominantly the work of improvements to the drains start in this area. This shown here is a future pedestrian walkway bridge that is a part of future trail improvements that exist along the Cahill drain. And it's also part of the identified work, since it's a structure going over top of the Cahill drain in the future. The costs associated with this future bridge is charged against the town. There's really no charge of cost to landowners for that. The works that's contained within this part of the Cahill drain involves mainly a widening of a section of drain here, with being that you're getting all the flow from the Lennon drain in this location, there was noticeable signs of deterioration and erosion within the Cahill drain. So we're looking to address that by placing the erosion protection needed, which is mainly of a Gabion stone rock liner that was over a portion of the channel, and particularly on the south bank of the drain. And that work is recommended to continue, and is really a transition of the drainage that is upstream, where it picks up the Lennon drain and continues downstream. Now, to the west of this pedestrian bridge, this portion of the drain here has greater capacity due to previous improvements. And given the land elevations of the lands on both sides of the drain, we found that there was no channel improvements necessary other than a few small isolated areas where there's a bit of debris and sediment to be removed, but very isolated spots there in a couple of locations. But otherwise, most of the work is starting at this location and heading upstream. So continuing upstream with what you see here with the erosion protection on the bank, this also encompasses a widening of the drain channel. So there's a bank widening recommended on the south side only. So we're trying to minimize disruption to the existing woodlot that basically covers this part of the Cahill Drain on both the north and south sides. The town of LaSalle owns the land to the south of the Cahill Drain. So with that future trail development, this side was selected for where these improvements could be made. As we continue further up the Cahill Drain, so where we picked up from the previous plan there, you can see again, this is where, once we're past this existing woodlot area, works are still continuing on the south side to essentially widen that part of the channel. And then when we get to the point here, we're at the existing utility corridors for the hydro and Plains Midstream pipeline areas. The drain here is now recommended to take a new course of alignment. And what you see here, where the drain is heading more to the north and heading up to join back in with the current drain alignment. This is a relocation that was part of a request by the owners of the lands for the Forest Trails Estates development. And so these works of the Cahill Drain realignment are also a part of this report. So basically this realignment of the drain is to improve, again, the capacity of the existing Cahill Drain, because we found there to be deficiencies in the capacity of the current drain. The current drain right now, you can see in a lighter alignment line here is actually going right through where this future development would be located. And so this existing Cahill Drain portion would be filled in as part of the work of the Cahill Drain realignment. And there was an existing access culvert that allowed a crossing on the drain here. That will be removed. That was found to be one of the restrictions on the drain, so that will come out as part of the improvements to the drain. And all costs associated with this drain realignment, including the engineering costs associated with it, are charged under this report to the owner of these development lands. So again, no costs that would apply to any other owners within the that make use of the Cahill Drain as an outlet. This I should also mention too that these lands in here where this future development is, as well as the other existing developed lands within the LaSalle Woods Boulevard area and further east, heading across here on Church Line or Disputed Road, they're all controlled through this large stormwater pond. So again, flows are contained and controlled through that development so that it does not put any additional pressure or increase the flow beyond the pre-development conditions of the area there now. Continuing past this drain realignment and heading further upstream on the Cahill Drain. So what you see here, here's this pond, here's the realignment. So picking up at this point and continuing upstream for 500 meters approximately from this point upstream, this is going through again lands that are partially protected under the woodlot and are not under any existing development. The works involved here are again involving a widening of one side of the drain, and we've selected where the widening improvements would be required would be along the north side of the Cahill Drain for this section, continuing up to where Sandalwood Court is located. And that's basically where the Sandalwood Court is, an existing street that terminates right here just before the Cahill Drain. And then continuing further east beyond Sandalwood Court, our recommended improvements then go to the south side, and access to the south side is easier found through an existing road allowance that's undeveloped but it's owned by the town of LaSalle, where we can get access here for construction and doing that improvement over to Huron Church. So there's a means of getting access from that location. So we've chosen the south side for the improvement there. And by electing to just improve on one side of the drain, again, minimizes the disturbance to existing properties as well as the existing tree area that does exist along the Cahill drain through a portion of this segment. So it included with the widening of the channel, there's approximately about 3 meters or 10 feet of width of land that would be taken for that purpose in that widening. And so any existing property owner that is an owner of land that's affected, whether they're on the north side for this lower portion or the south side for this upper part, they are given compensation through this report in terms of an allowance for the value of the land that's used for that purpose to widen the drain. And those allowances are found within the report in Schedule B. You would find a table there that lists those lands that have been accounted for that allowance. The other remaining work past this location here with the drain widening, we found that the remaining section of drain heading up to the intersection of where Huron Church Road and Normandy Boulevard is, there was no additional drain improvement needed to the channel, with the exception of there's some erosion that's occurred near the Huron Church Line bridge crossing, where we've identified some work to fix some existing erosion control measures that were showing signs of failure. So we are recommending some work there, as well as the cleaning of the culvert under Huron Church Road that has accumulated a bit of sediment. So costs associated with these works under the road being partially managed by the town of LaSalle and also through Normandy Avenue, but also the Huron Church Line being part of the county's road area. There's a cost charge to those two for that work. And again, no cost for that work is really included in the assessment against other lands. Just to show a little bit of detail what this drain improvement looks like that I just explained, that's between station 3000 and station 3+500. So these two sections here show essentially where that widening of the drain, you can see the existing channel and what the widening looks like. So again, one side selected for part of that on the north side, and then the upper part, the south side. So, the widening is not too significant, but we found that based on past improvements that were made going back to the late 1980s, the drain no longer has maintained that capacity. And so these are necessary improvements to convey what's required to be the minimum capacity for municipal drain serving the type of lands that we're dealing with, which I said earlier is mostly residential areas that are served by the Cahill drain. So that gives you an idea of the involved. As far as Jonathan mentioned, that the cost of the engineer's report to get it to this stage, to the point of passing it under the bylaw, is under an agreement with the Ministry of Transportation, where they've agreed to pay all those costs as part of the overall drainage works. There are also costs that are assessed to the ministry for other parts of the work as well, as they are a contributor. When in our review of the design of the parkway work, and there is a fairly large stormwater pond facility that was built that was specifically for the part of the highway that was going to drain into the Cahill drain. And we found through our examination of those design works that the pond is sized sufficiently to allow the drainage from the parkway to be controlled. So essentially it is all pumped from, all the drainage from the highway is pumped through a storm sewer system into a pond. And then it's released from the pond under a control orifice pipe that only allows a small amount of flow to not ensure that up to the 1 in 100-year storm event, that no greater flow rate would cross the highway than what had previously been the case before the parkway works had started. And we've confirmed through our analysis that is the case. However, with the increased imperviousness of the highway, with there being more paved surfaces and there's a higher amount of water that would run off those lands, that again is captured by the pond, but eventually is drained through the Cahill drain. So the Cahill drain is being required to carry a greater volume of water, although extend over a farther, much longer time period, which doesn't impact the drain in terms of its conveyance or flooding, but it does have an impact as far as the use of the drain and having to just convey just that much more water in terms of total volume. So that is also something that is taken into account when looking at improvements to a drain and the contributing lands to it, and what those lands should pay towards those improvements. So those are assessment related items that Mr. Peralta in his part of the report where he outlines the assessment of those costs and some of the special costs, that's all explained in detail there. So I won't go into any more detail there because that's really his part of this report. So I guess with that, I mean, that's basically just an overview quickly of what is contained within the report. And so at this point, I guess I can turn it back to Jonathan. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. And I think if Tim or if Tony has anything he'd like to go over, we could do that now.
Sure. Thank you through you, Mayor Bondi. I do have a very short PowerPoint presentation that I'll share my screen. Oh, I do not have. I do.
What?
There we go. So, yeah, so just a very short presentation, just to kind of outline things. I didn't want to go into too much details on the technical merits of the assessment merits of this project, only simply because that is more for the Core Revision. However, I felt it was very important to identify some of the key aspects of the project to help guide and assist on the project details. So as Tim had alluded to, this is a joint appointment where Engineer Peralta Engineering and Dylan has jointly been assigned this project through the provisions of the Act. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Drainage Act. However, it is one of the oldest pieces of legislation that was created in the late 1800s, and it specifically deals with communal drainage projects called municipal drains. As Tim noted, this particular project is intended to address the overall improvements to the municipal drain, to reestablish drain parameters, cost distributions, cost allocations, and future maintenance provisions. Again, as Tim noted, my role in this particular project was dealing with the appropriate assessment rationale and distribution of costs. And it's fairly detailed. I don't want to bore you with all the minutiae of the report, but it is something that I wanted to review. One of the key things I kind of want to discuss, just so you understand the aspects of the engineer's roles under the Drainage Act. It's very important. Section 11 here, as you can see here, is a very important aspect of the Drainage Act, and I felt it is very important to explain our roles as engineers. So the engineers are intended to be impartial, as we have a great deal of responsibility and entrusted with a great deal of responsibility on this particular drainage systems. And the key here are the words highlighted in bold there, where the engineer is supposed to be honest, faithful, without fear of favor to or prejudice. But I want to make sure that the landowners and council understands that although the engineer is held responsible for a great deal of responsibility, there are safeguards built into the system where the landowners are allowed to or are encouraged to participate in the process, and there are appeal period processes for these landowners. So when it comes to the basis of assessment, the engineers entrusted to gather the facts and supporting documentation regarding the required works on the project. The engineer uses case law and precedents to understand the limitations and the proper interpretations. And based on the engineer's duties and the information gathered, they are to make discretionary evaluation and assessments related to each component of the system. So when it comes to assessments, there's three distinct types of assessments under the Drainage Act. The first one being a benefit assessment, and that is mainly derived by how the drainage system could potentially affect each property, either by increasing property value, increasing appearance, better control of surface or subsurface water, ease or reduced maintenance, and so on and so forth. A way I like to explain benefit is how the drainage improvements affect you if the drain didn't exist, and how would your stormwater affect the property. And then when it comes to outlet and injuring liability, it is generally calculated based on the amount of runoff produced from the property, based on area and general use of the land. There are special assessments or special benefits under the Drainage Act. Not always that common, however, they are there for any additional work or features included in the project that has no real effect on the functionality of the system, such as a special or a private feature that is essentially assessed to one property or benefits only one property. And then we have special assessments under Section 26 of the Drainage Act, where the road authorities or public utilities, are assessed all increased costs caused by their existence. So in other words, if a road or utility did not exist, would that portion of the drainage works be required? A perfect example of that is a road crossing. If the road crossing did not exist, the drainage system could be conveying water as an open channel. And therefore, the road authority, in that case, would be assessed the additional cost for enclosing it and putting a pipe. So as noted in Part B of the report, assessment considerations, the report is rather detailed. I didn't want to get into too much of that, especially considering the fact that this is more of a technical based meeting. But the report does go into a lot of these details, and also touches base on a little bit on special considerations such as block assessments and effects of stormwater management. There is a consideration of the forthcoming Old Castle Stormwater Master Drainage Plan that we have collaborated with that engineer to ensure that we are consistent with how things are addressed. And the last portion is more or less dealing with how future development will be dealt with in the watershed. The report or the assessment component of it does have assessment schedules included in the report. One for construction, which distributes the cost for all the construction engineering works related to the project. And then there's future maintenance schedules, which distributes costs for all future works on the drain. We included a separate from the report. We did include a construction schedule of assessment based on the fact that the MTO is paying all the report costs. And that separate schedule includes or removes the MTO cost for the report and identifies the reduced value affected to all the properties. And that's essentially all I have for you today. Again, this is a meeting to consider technical merits. However, there is typically some other questions related to assessments. I'll try not to get into the individual assessments questions, but if there are general questions related to assessments, I'd be happy to address those. So now I'll pass it back to you, Mayor Bondi. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Jonathan, any closing remarks before we open it up for questions?
No, I just like to thank Tim and Tony for their presentations, and I think now I'm not sure, Jennifer, if we'd see the delegates now, or I'll leave that with you.
Any delegates? I see there was one here. I don't know if Angela, I don't even try to. Angela Bondi? Is she with us? No. Okay. So it doesn't look like any delegates, Jonathan. Okay, we'll start with Councillor Carrick for questions.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just through, we do the upgrades for the drain. I guess we're going through this right now, and I see there's obviously a room for upgrades in the future, but what would be the expectancy of the work we're doing and how long it should last, so that we're not dealing with this, say, 5-10 years from now, so that it actually works a little longer if we're going in there now?
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I believe what's laid out in the report is, to do those improvements now, and included as a maintenance assessment and schedule. So it does make it quite a bit easier for us to go in, 2 years, 5 years down the road and do the needed maintenance and have an ability to assess those costs back appropriately as per the report. So we have that up-to-date engineer's report on hand to be able to use going forward.
So I guess further to that then, so we are expecting that we'll have to do some work, like once this has gone through, that we're still gonna have to go in there and do some touch-ups and some adjusting. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that would be true for any drain, but hopefully we are able to do it a little more frequently. I mean, the big one that, is nice to stay on top of is at least the brushing and keeping that brush out of the channel of the drain. So that's the one that it would be nice to be able to do a bit more often with the report in hand. And then there would be minor sediment removal needed from time to time, but hopefully it won't be too many years down the road, and we'll be able to kind of stay more on top of it.
Okay, thanks. And then just one further, and maybe this isn't the appropriate spot to ask this question, but I know we're doing a study for IRCA, the hydraulics and all that stuff for the drains. When or if the company in Windsor, would they be, because they contribute to this drain? Are we looking at that as part of assessment value, or is that not part of this process?
That's not part of this Drainage Act process. This is to look at the existing Cahill and get it back into a state of repair and function that we need it in. That,
Okay.
Although that work that's being done is part of that drainage system, they are separate processes. I see Pete popped on. Maybe you might speak to that for a second.
Mr. Mara.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Osborne. Mr. Mayor, through you. Certainly, this is building upon the overall master drainage study and the modeling work that is occurring in the Cahill and Turkey Creek. Should that modeling come back and have to revisit this report gives us the baseline of where that water is being generated. So it's going to streamline that distribution of those costs in the fashion of what is in this report. So this report does cover properties in both Windsor, Tecumseh, and in LaSalle, and the appropriate shares and costs for us as a municipality, for Windsor as a municipality, for Tecumseh as a municipality, and for all of their individual ratepayers as well, and as well as our ratepayers. So should work be identified to have to increase capacity on Turkey Creek, Cahill Drain in the future through some of those real larger expansive modeling efforts, then this gives us that basis of how to readjust and assess those out properly to those various municipalities, as well as their ratepayers and things of that nature.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, guys.
Councillor Reno.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I think my question will be for Jonathan. Jonathan, in one of the earlier presentations, I think it was Tim's, we talked about the Lennon drain, and that's kind of where this work is all about to start. Where, just for my own purpose, whereabouts in LaSalle is that junction?
So that would be at just a bit west of where Forest Trails ends currently. So if you went down LaSalle Woods Boulevard, You know, a few hundred feet further west would be where kind of the Cahill and Lennon Drain confluence is. There's also, when you walk in the path through the park there, there's kind of a spot where it bends up. It's not too far from that location either.
Okay, that's helpful. I have gotten a few phone calls, people wondering what today's meeting was all about, and they were going to be watching on YouTube. So just kind of gave them a little bit of an idea. And my other question, I think, has been answered. So the town of LaSalle represents about 35% of this entire drain that's going to benefit. Is that about correct?
Jonathan shaking his head, yes.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm looking at some of the dollar figures here of 886,000 minus the relocation and stuff. So I think the next meeting will be rather painless. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I have one. If this is approved, when would the work start, or do you have to go at certain times of the year?
Hard to answer, but I'll start with, we have, after this meeting concludes, and if council does agree to take the first and second bylaw, we would then schedule the quarter revision, which would probably be a month and a half-ish out from now. And assuming we get through that meeting and without hold up or appeal, there's a chance we could maybe do some work later this year, given if we are lining up with the timing windows that are out there for work and drains. I think Tim and Tony have probably a better handle on what those windows are, but it might be a stretch to see something happen this year. I don't know, might be a bit of a stretch.
Well, the reason I asked the question, I'm sure the developer would like to get that last section done. So would we do the work, or would the subcontractor hired, or would the developer do that section?
Sorry, I'll throw that caveat in there. Once the report is approved, that developer may want to do their work in advance of the other works happening, which is allowed. So and that they have equipment to be able to do that work as well. So I think that might be something we might see. And as far as the other work that happens on the rest of the drain, we would tender that out. And that would be bid on by contractors.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Okay, there's no public. Oh, I'm sorry, Crystal, Deputy Mayor Malash.
Thank you. It's actually a question that kind of piggybacks off of what you just asked. You mentioned possible objections or appeals at the next stage. What would those consist of? Like, what would they be objecting to, I guess, is my main question. And then I do know we have other municipalities involved. Could that delay our process? What's going on in other municipalities?
They can question and I think theoretically object to their assessment that's been given to their property. But the idea is, and Tim or Tony, feel free to correct me, but the idea is to hear those in advance of the meeting, like once the notification is out, to get all those questions in, to hopefully be able to address them before we get to the meeting. And at the end of the day, they do have to have merit in order to go anywhere. So likely it might be something that can be adjusted or resolved before we even have the meeting of the quarter revision. But then that meeting is there as kind of a catch-all to make adjustments if needed.
Councillor Reno.
One last question, and I apologize, it's going to get close to an assessment type question, but how many properties in LaSalle are being affected by this drainage?
I think there's 1,700 properties roughly in here.
Thank you very much.
But you forgot to say, Jonathan, a lot of those are owned by the same people. Okay. Recommendations: council adopts the engineering report for the Cahill drain dated October 9th, 2020, and gives first and second reading to bylaw 8668. And being a bylaw to provide for the maintenance, improvement, and realignment of the Cahill drain. Council's pleasure. Moved by Deputy Mayor Malash, support Councillor Carrick. All in favor on the recommendation and the bylaws? It passes unanimously. Okay. Okay, separate bylaw readings. Bylaw 8668, first and second reading on both. Counselor Reno and Counselor Di Spagnolo, all in favor? That carries. Confirmatory bylaw, first reading. Counselor Carrick and Counselor Reno, all in favor? That carries. Second reading. Counselor Di Spagnolo, Deputy Mayor Malash, all in favor? That carries. Third and final reading. Counselor Desjardins, Counselor Di Spagnolo, all in favor? That carries.